Cyber warfare does not represent war in itself. It's a fundamental difference between the two terms. On the one side, we have the term physical war, where the one state declares war to the other. And on the other side, we have what I call non-kinetic warfare, information warfare, which is very often driven by psychological targets on the one side, deception on the other side, and then possibly we will have fundamental damages, property damages, and possibly also bodily injuries. Let's have a look briefly what has happened since January 14th in the meantime, and particularly with a view on February 24th when the Russian troops invaded the Ukraine. Let me start with the example of the attack on the European satellite system, particularly the attack on KSAT, a satellite, geopolitical satellite, which is geostationary satellite, which is handled by the American company Viasat. That particularly relevant satellite operates also the communication system of the Ukrainian military service. And when the Russian troops entered specifically on 24th of February, we had certain interferences and certain interruptions confirmed. We never had a confirmation that that particular attack happened by the nation state sponsored of country X. Nobody so far has attributed it to Russia directly. Having said that, there is a certain probability that the one country has been responsible for the other thing. What is really important and what is really challenging when we're talking about such attacks are the facts around the attribution challenges. Attribution means it's done on behalf of a state, by a state, possibly by a state-closed actor at the end of the day, from a cybersecurity point of view. And that's not easy to prove, but it's fundamental when it comes down to judgments. One of the industries which are obviously in the middle of the targets, or I call it broader industry, is so-called critical infrastructure industry. Critical infrastructure related to the energy side, critical infrastructure to utilities, possibly banks. And again, this definition very much depends on the country you are in. In certain countries, you have certain industries which are strategic, which are critical. Having said that, even if you have, for instance, telecommunication companies, not every telecommunication company is necessarily being listed by the country as a critical infrastructure. What does that mean specifically when we're talking about interests of investors, interests of individuals, interests of governments? 3 points. Number one, an attack on any kind of very highly sophisticated protected system, such as telecommunication companies, such as specific electricity companies, are feasible. Having said that, they require significant time investment, significant resources behind. Let me bridge to the initial case we saw in the Ukraine. On January 14th, we had Whispergate. Whispergate specifically was a malware, was a combination to a DDoS in the end. And we are now aware of that some of the codes, some of the malware probably was sleeping in the systems for nearly a year. Already in April in 2021, the first attempts were done. Published and disclosed the case was only in December 2021. But obviously the attack, the main attack specifically in Ukraine, happened in mid-January 2022. What lesson can we learn out of this? Quite fundamental. The lesson is not simple, but it's very important. It's vital to understand. And this particular message is built around anyone can become a victim of a cyber attack. It doesn't matter what size the company has. It doesn't matter in which industry you are. Anyone can potentially be a victim of a cyber attack, or particularly a victim of collateral damages. Bridging back to the KSAT case, to the geostationary satellite, the consequences out of that attack were ultimately collateral damages all over Europe. Not highly published so far, but they hit ultimately the European continent. Could that be an example of what's coming in the future? From my point of view, definitely. What lessons should we take out of this? Where are the chances? Where are the risks, specifically from a risk landscape point of view? Focus is very clear from a cybersecurity point of view. It's really the focus on not just data corruption, not just deletion of data. It's about system corruption, system destruction, system deletion at the end of the day. So we're taking further steps ahead when it comes down to malware. We're not just talking here about specific ransomwares, we're talking here specific so-called wipers, and wipers are the absolute deletion of data and potential attacks on the system in itself. What does it mean for you as individuals, for companies and states? It means the following thing. It means a focus on a number of core points. Number one, simplest way to focus on passwords. We all talk about dual identification. I personally am not a big fan anymore of passwords in general. I'm more, if you use passwords, then obviously don't use simple passwords with just capital letters and numbers, for instance, special signs. Combine in dual identification. The problematic is always going to be around the aspect of using, for instance, SMSs or using on the other side calls. This type of dual identification might end into phishing attacks as well. So hence, I'm more of the view going forward that we're going to the area of much broader, sophisticated password protections in the future. Where can we really make a fundamental difference going forward? I think we can make a fundamental difference not just to identify the user, but most important, identify the device you're using. So far, there's very little device identification being done. Another point to protect people is really the broader use beyond just VPNs. So it's not just using virtual network protections, because fact is, as soon as you're online, there is a way how you can get access to the network and from there get an access back to the device. And this leads into specific challenges. In my view, the lowest hanging fruit is what I call the zero trust concept. And the zero trust concept in IT security is very much along the lines of give access to the systems, to the devices, to individuals, to whatever they need, but not beyond what they should need. So limit it. Limit the risk of a horizontal attack or a vertical attack by clustering the accesses around a limited scope. Extend that scope if and when necessary, but don't have open scopes across permissions for an overall company. That should be very limited and only to key people. Last but not least, be aware of where the lowest hanging fruit for an intruder would be. The lowest hanging fruit for an intruder is always general cyber non-hygiene, or very often at board level as well. That has nothing to do with non-hygiene at board level when it comes down to cybersecurity. It's rather the point of top management people are very often so much under pressure that they miss, in certain cases out of experience, the most simple protections. The most simple protections doesn't necessarily mean IT security protection. It starts with where is the phone, how is it being used, where is it being used, and ultimately get access to this phone. Lessons learned out of such cases overall are quite simple from my point of view. Anyone needs to expect an attack. That attack can be simple in the form of a phishing email. It can be through a ransomware attack as a consequence out of it. And ultimately, it can put in jeopardy not just you as an individual, but ultimately the company in itself. We could have, in other words, so-called collateral damages. Where are we from a corporate point of view when it is related to what I call digital trust? The digital trust aspect is really around stakeholders want to have trust in the employees, in the data, in the processing, in the systems. And the more you can provide this particular trust, the higher the success rate would be with investors. We're also talking about sustainability in respect of sustainable finance, for instance. Sustainable finance requires also cybersecurity. And ultimately, such a closing of the circle results into further prosperity. So these are the upsides. The more you invest as a company into cybersecurity, the more you can make a difference compared to your peers, the higher is the success rate potentially for your company, and the longer is the potential success rate going on. Let me conclude with the fact related to how can you protect yourself externally. One way of doing is definitely the way of purchasing cyber insurance policies. Cyber insurance policies can add a lot of value, but I would call them not to be the golden panacea. They require to be very appropriately, closely structured with your risk team on the one side, with your catastrophe team and the external insurer, because you will expect one day a cyber claim, or you will see one day a so-called cyber attack, and you want to make sure that that insurance policy will then be triggered and you will have your claim paid. Where is the future going when it comes down to cybersecurity? It's becoming more complex. It's not about what I call the privacy attacks, the network security attacks. It's really, I foresee many more active operations by states or close state-sponsored actors, which ultimately focus on strategic industries within a country, and these again are the critical infrastructures. The probability of a critical infrastructure attack will exponentially increase. The potential damages will also exponentially increase. Hence, we should never underestimate the importance of proper cybersecurity and the risk of such attacks.